Okay. Section 5.3, Act 1, Scene 2, begin. Here in this paragraph, they teach us the word etymology, which is the study of the history of a word. Here they call it the verbal history, but it's the history of any word. Etymology comes from the Greek etymos, which means true. So it's the truth, the study of the truth of a word. Ology means the study of. So etymology would be the study of the truth of a word, or the study of truth in general. Let's see here. Plot summary, they're a little sneaky this time. They don't just write out the plot summary. They do it as a little quiz. So, who does Leonato? Remember, Leonato is the governor. Who does he run into at the beginning of the scene? He runs into Antonio at the beginning of the scene, which is how he discovers the incorrect version of Don Pedro and Claudio's conversation. Who overheard Don Pedro's conversation with Claudio, the one where they're talking about getting into disguise to woo Hero. A servant overheard it and reported it back to Leonato. Leonato's servant is the one who misheard the conversation outside the window. This information was later reported to Leonato. Beatrice wasn't even in the scene, and Hero becomes a victim of the issue. What's Leonato's reaction when he learns it was Don Pedro who supposedly left his daughter? Answer, Leonato isn't angry or confused. He is defiant and refuses to believe the information until he sees further proof of it, which is a good reaction because it's not true. When will Don Pedro attempt to woo Hero? That night at the dance. The very evening at the masked ball. That way he can speak to her without fear of being discovered. Okay. Context. It is important to understand the origins of certain words and how these origins affect meaning. Studying the etymology can provide you with more context and a deeper understanding, especially when the words have dual purpose and definition like in Shakespeare's works. And exercise in etymology. Now look at 5 words from the play. Acquaint, accordant, sharp, acknowledge, and peradventure. Review the context clues in the table below to help you guess the meaning. Finally, look up the definitions and the etymology. Well, we'll do the first part at least. Well, the word is acquaint. Leonato says he will acquaint Hero with all that has happened so she can be better prepared to answer. Make familiar. He will make Hero familiar with all that has happened. He'll just tell you. Accordant. Antonio is describing what Don Pedro was believed to have said about hoping to find Hero accordant to Claudio's desires. Amenable to, in sympathy with, to make them willing to accept Claudio's desires. Sharp. Antonio describes the one who told him about Don Pedro's conversation as being a sharp fellow. So like an intelligent fellow. Sharp-witted. Acknowledge. Antonio says Claudio meant to acknowledge or admit his love of... Well, there's a definition right there. Admit. Acknowledge his love of Hero that night at the dance. Meaning stop ignoring it and bring it out into the forefront. Peradventure. Leonato says he will speak to Hero about Claudio's love in the event or peradventure it's true. Perhaps. It basically just means perhaps. Peradventure it be true. Perhaps it's true. There you go. Compare and contrast. To dig more deeply into the meaning of the literature, readers often are asked to compare and contrast certain pieces. The necklace. Why are you bringing up the necklace? We haven't mentioned that at all. Guide to Maupain's net. Where did the necklace come up? Was that in English too? Although the plot lines are different in each work, some comparisons can be drawn around the shared theme of deception. Think about the ways Hero, Pip, and Matilda all struggle with this concept and are ultimately victimized by it. In Great Expectations, Pip, the main character, comes to believe he is being groomed to marry Estella. Estella is an orphan who was raised by a wealthy woman. The wealthy woman, Miss Havisham, actually raises Estella to manipulate and reject Pip. Okay, so it's themes of deception. Deception unite the 3 stories, The Necklace, Great Expectations, and Much Ado About Nothing. Write that down. Exercise, compare and contrast. Nah, that sounds boring. Flashcards. Etymology, the history or study of a word. Origin of words. That's it? That's all you had? Okay. Key points and links. Antonio passes on the gossip he heard to Leonardo. One of his men hears Don Pedro and Claudio saying that Don Pedro loves Hero and that he plans to propose at the dance that night. Leonardo decides not to take this too seriously unless he knows for sure it will happen, but warns Hero so she will be prepared in case these events unfold. Etymology is important in the way it promotes deeper understanding of words, and side-by-side analysis of different literary works can lend a greater understanding to certain ideas and illustrate the various methods writers use to express universal concepts. Well, there wasn't much to this section. I guess, you know what? Let's just stay here and move on to 5.4. Come on. Act 1, Scene 3, and Act 1 Review. Is this one going to be longer? In this next scene of the play, you see a drastic change in the character of Don John, who first appeared rather submissive. However, his bitterness about his life and jealousy of his brother Don Pedro and friend Claudio has gotten the better of him, and he now feels compelled to cause trouble. Driven by the idea that his actions may prove food to his displeasure, or feed his displeasure, he stirs up deceit without any real motive besides a general feeling of malcontent towards Claudio. His devious intentions are firmly established during this short scene and set the tone for the unfolding of the drama. Plot summary, test your reading skills. What's Don John's explanation for always being melancholy? It's his natural state of being. He has suffered a great tragedy. He misses his friends. I cannot hide what I am. So it's just his natural state of being so melancholy, being so dramatically sad. It's just his natural state of being. Then he won't pretend that he is something he isn't, even if it makes others uncomfortable. What does Don John think of Conrad's reminder to remain on good terms with his brother, Don Pedro? Don John is overcome by bitterness and jealousy in this scene, and has committed himself to exacting some sort of revenge on those around him. So A is what they're aiming for. He feels bitter that he has to depend on his brother's good graces. How is Borachio's version of Don Pedro's conversation different from the one that Antonio heard? Okay, so Antonio and Borachio are the two servants that overhear. Antonio heard a lie. Borachio's version is correct. Borachio is deaf in one ear. Leonardo's servant informed Antonio of only part of the conversation. Borachio overheard Don Pedro's desire to woo Hero for Claudio, not himself. And so what's the answer? Borachio's version is correct. That's the one. What's the difference? Borachio hears it correctly. Antonio misinterprets it. Okay. Why does Don John hate Claudio? Because he loves Hero? Because he thinks he cheated him? Because he's jealous of Claudio's affable reputation? Don John hates everyone, including himself. He's riddled with self-loathing, fear, and jealousy. Claudio has been successful of late and has love in his heart, both of which draw Don John's scorn. Yeah, so he's jealous of Claudio's affable reputation. Literary devices. In astrology, people born under Saturn are believed to be naturally gloomy and stubborn in their moodiness, which is what Don John refers to when he says that he can't change or disguise his feelings. Don John said he would rather be a canker in a hedge than a rose in his grace, using the word canker figuratively, describing a plant disease and comparing it to a more pleasant rose. However, the word also literally means a pernicious and bad influence that is hard to get rid of, which perfectly describes Don John's personality. So, is that irony? No, that's not irony. Parallelism? Metaphor. It's a metaphor. Don John also reveals that despite his natural melancholic state, Claudio and Don Pedro are the main reason for his current gloominess. Don Pedro, against whom he was at war and who he actually tried to overthrow, was victorious over him, and Claudio was celebrated for his acts in battle. To ease his own bitterness and jealousy, Don John turns his malice towards Claudio and pledges to ruin his chances with his beloved Hero. Whereas the other characters are lively and light-hearted, Don John is a self-described villain who plays mean-spirited tricks on others. When he says, "I am trusted with a muzzle and enfranchised with a clog," He's using the word enfranchise ironically, because these restrictive items actually don't offer any freedom at all. They're only hindrances. Even though Don Pedro hasn't locked up his troublesome brother, he still doesn't trust him. Shakespeare uses the literary device anaphora, hey, just like from Great Expectations, the repetition of a word or words at the beginning of a sentence. When Don John says, "If I had my mouth, I would bite. If I had liberty, I would do my liking." If I had, the repetition of if I had, creates a sound effect and emphasizes the meaning behind the language. When it comes to the characters in this play, deception is a central theme that pops up in many situations. The exchanges of words between Beatrice and Benedict are deceivingly wicked, while Don Pedro attempts to deceive Hero into thinking he is Claudio. In many ways, this deception is a means to an end. It is a way to woo a young woman. Other examples of deception are flat-out malicious, like Don John's attempt to ruin Hero's reputation. Hero also deceives others with the ruse of her death as a way to find redemption and reconciliation with Claudio. She and her ladies deceive Claudio even further by forcing him to blindly marry Leonardo's niece, who is actually Hero in disguise. Shakespeare works hard to illustrate that deceit itself isn't inherently bad, but rather a weapon that can be wielded for many purposes. While it can be a little tricky to distinguish good and bad deception among the characters, it's clear they all become caught up in their own deceptive actions in one way or another, always using it to further their own agendas. Okay. Is that really all? 5.4? Repetition is the only flashcard. Huh. What's the exercise in deception? Describe Don John's role in the theme of deception, particularly in the way he hides his true feelings and plans. Okay, Don John is the sneaky brother, the one who's illegitimate, and he sneaks around and behind everyone's back trying to mess up their day. Okay, so that'll do it for 5.4, and I'll join you in 5.5.